Welcome to the Frontline Herbalism Podcast with your host, Nicole from the Solidarity Apothecary. This is your place for all things plants and liberation. Let's get started. Hello, welcome back to the Frontline Herbalism Podcast. Here I am sharing an amazing interview with Jackie Sumell from the Solitary Gardens project. She will speak to, what the project is about and its origins, but it's a really incredible project connecting abolition and gardening and food growing spaces and all the things. I think it's, probably one of the most beautiful projects that I know of that really collaborates like deeply with people in solitary confinement. This interview was recorded just before I gave birth, so there's a tiny bit of time travel. Just a couple of reminders that there's still time to order ebooks with all the income going to the Sumell project in Gaza. There's still some places on the practical medicine making intensive taking place at the end of September. And also not long to go now until my herbalism, PTSD and traumatic stress course. So I will put those links in the show notes, and I'll put all of the resources from the Solitary Gardens in the show notes too. Thanks so much again to Jackie for her time, and please enjoy the interview. Okay, hey, thanks so much for coming. Please, can you introduce yourself, your pronouns, like any political affinities or projects you'd like to include?
Hey, Nicole Rose. I'm Jackie Sumell. I use she, her pronouns. I am here in Bulbancha, the unceded territory of the Chitimacha, Choctaw, and Homa nations, currently also called New Orleans, Louisiana. And I'm coming to you with big blessings and conversations around solitary gardens, the Abolitionist Apothecary, the John Thompson Legacy Center, and freedom to grow. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming. I've had such an organizer crush on the project, on Solitary Gardens ever since I found out about it. And every time you share stuff on Instagram, I literally cry. But for folks who don't know what you do, can you share a bit about yourself and what the Solitary Gardens project is about?
Yeah, I'd be happy to share. I just want to make it publicly known that the crush is mutual and that your book has been shared with many folks inside carceral institutions here in the colonized United States. And I'm just so grateful for your work. Yeah, and thankful that we're able to meet each other in this, digital airspace. I mean, all of my personal and political orientation comes from my elders. Those are Herman Wallace, Albert Woodfox, and Robert King, primarily, but I also have done some deep work with a man named Wally Moo Johnson and John Thompson. And these are all formerly incarcerated folks here in Louisiana. Herman, Albert, and Robert are collectively known as the Angola Three because they spent decades in solitary confinement in the largest penitentiary in the colonized United States, which is the Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola. And so that is up the Mississippi River from where I am currently. It's about 2.5 hours drive away. And I think it's really important to ground this conversation and orientation around the history of Angola, which, is nicknamed the plantation, nicknamed the farm, because of its egregious history as a plantation. Angola was first colonized by a man named Isaac Benjamin, actually from Great Britain, who recognized the potential of creating wealth and profit by creating an enslaved person breeding plantation upriver from the slave port of Nouvelle Orleans or New Orleans. And, at the time, Louisiana was colonized first by an indigo plantation, and then subsequently, the largest chattel crops were actually sugarcane, which were the bloodiest and most violent of all of the chattel crops, all of the forced labor crops. And so Isaac Benjamin colonized and created a plantation where he could repopulate those sugarcane fields with enslaved persons. And it has this, egregious legacy in the soil as much as it does in the economic paradigm in 2024, where every able-bodied prisoner is forced to work for 2 to 20 cents an hour, a minimum of 40 hours a week on that same land. And 30% of the population of Louisiana, a little more, is Black, but 76% plus or minus of the population that's incarcerated, or I would say enslaved, in Angola prison today is Black. And so we're seeing this legacy of forced labor practices predominantly on Black and brown bodies whose ancestors were part of chattel slavery in the state of Louisiana. And, I gained access to this work in the early 2000s by meeting a man who spent 29 years in solitary confinement in Angola. His name's Robert King. And he came home and shared his story. And I was, in shock and disbelief as a graduate student out in California. And, the long story tolerable is that, I just asked him, what can I do as a graduate student? And he said, write my comrades, write Herman Wallace and write Albert Woodfox, and let the prison know they're alive. And so I've spent the last 23 years in orientation around their lives and legacies. And in doing so, gotten to know many, many people who are kept in solitary confinement here in the US. And so my work, which began as a collaboration with Herman. So Herman was on his 29th year of solitary confinement, 29 years in a 6 foot by 9 foot cell, a minimum of 23 hours a day. And when I was 29 years old, and we collaborated on a project called The House That Herman Built, where he designed and envisioned his dream house for about 12 years. And I, as an artist, translated those drawings into this, traveling exhibition and book. And ultimately it became a documentary, which, I in no uncertain terms believe was an advocacy campaign that worked as a fulcrum to his ultimate freedom. On October 1st, 2013, the federal courts here in the United States overturned Herman's conviction, and he came home. And he joined the ancestors 3 days later on October 4th, 2013, suffering from the advanced stages of liver cancer. And so, I live in Louisiana to be closer to Herman and Albert and to continue this work. And so when Herman passed, it was really disorienting at best and devastating at worst. And I really had to reinvent, some of the purpose, which went from bringing him home to upholding his life and legacy. And that's where the birth of Solitary Gardens came from. Herman and I not only shared visits to the prison twice a month, but, thousands of letters. And so when he joined the ancestors, I went back and read those letters, and in a shared space that I know you and I occupy, realized how much he talked about plants and gardens and how much, the natural world fueled his possibility and gave him life. And, in fact, when I asked him what kind of house does a man who's lived in a 6 by 9 cell for 29, 30, 41 years dream of, he said, I can clearly see the gardens, and they will be full of gloxinias, delphiniums, and roses. And I wish for guests to be able to smile and walk through gardens all year round. And so the Solitary Gardens takes that cell, that 6 by 9 cell that Herman, Albert, Robert, Walimu, JT, all of these elders have spent decades in, and turns it into a garden. And that garden is then grown with someone who is currently incarcerated. And in a lot of ways, the Solitary Gardens become portraits of folks who are condemned to the worst of our humanity and our complicity here in the colonized United States.
Oof, I told you before we started that everything makes me cry with this pregnancy and in general. But yeah, I can really hear the pain of the grief of that relationship and how much it must have shaped your life as well as the project. So yeah, just briefly, like, what are people in solitary confinement where you are, like, commonly experiencing? You mentioned the size of the cells and the 23 hours a day bang up. Can you speak about any of the prisoners who are currently connecting with at present and what life is like for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think in no uncertain terms that solitary confinement is cruel and unusual punishment, which is alleged to be protected under the Eighth Amendment of the Constitution here in the US, And so solitary confinement is actually a really hard target to hit in terms of abolition because it's named so many different things. It's a monster with a different name, depending on the institution where you are incarcerated. In Angola, and just to be clear, we have solitary gardens around the country, and we work with incarcerated folks around the country. So in different prisons and jails and detention centers. In Angola, the prison, that I've spent the most time in, solitary confinement is called CCR, closed cell restriction. And, anyone can be put into solitary at the discretion of the correctional officers. So there's no judge or jury that determines whether or not you will spend time in solitary. It is, the keepers of the death camps that make the rules, which is another layer of cruel and unusual. The physical shape is a 6x9 cell with a bed, a desk, a toilet sink. And so the negative space we are actually allowed to physically move is actually smaller than 6x9. One of the things that King used to say was even more torturous is that they're 6 foot by 9 foot by 12 foot high. And so there's a negative space or empty space. The most space is actually unusable. It's above you. So you're in this, space as a premium. And then you have all of this empty space that can't be used because it's cement and steel inside the solitary cell. But, I've worked with folks who are in ADX, which is the federal prison. It's a supermax prison in Colorado, and 80% of that prison is actually intentionally built underground to continue torturing, to further the fulcrum of torture that we are capable of doing here in the colonized United States. And so that, the folks that are in ADX, I say 23-1 at Angola, for instance, which is 23 hours inside the cell, 1 hour outside. At ADX, it's 24 hours inside the cell. There's actually a shower in there. And you have to sort of work your way up through good behavior to be able to leave the cell, to go inside another cell, an outside cell, which would be yard time. So that's also, you're never having human contact. So you're deprived access to human contact. And, I just want to be clear that we as human beings design these cells. We as human beings design our carceral institutions, and we as human beings have every capacity to destroy them, to unbuild them, with the possibility of actually creating systems that address harm without creating more. And so, although so much of what I share, what I've had access to the last 23 years, is radically devastating, it is also radically empowering, because if we are complicit in these systems of punishment and control, we are ultimately connected, and then it is possible to dismantle them as much as it is possible to build them.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the beautiful questions kind of often found on your social media and etched into your gardens is can you imagine a landscape without prisons? And I can really hear you speak to that in this process of unbuilding them. But yeah, what does this question about imagine a landscape without prisons mean to you?
I think that, one of the first targets of the oppressor is the imagination. And one of the giant gifts of the natural world is a healing of the imagination. Herman was able to exist outside of his conditioned confinement, his physical confinement, because of the superpower of his imagination. And arguably, if it wasn't so powerful, if it wasn't so dangerous, humanities and arts programs around the country wouldn't be the first cut in our public schools and institutions. And so this idea of imagining a landscape without prisons is really seeded as a prompt and a call. There have been times in collective human history where prisons did not exist. And I'm not saying that the forms of punishment and torture were any better, but we imagined them and we built them. And so what can we build in their place? You know, what kind of institutions can we build in the places and spaces where prisons once existed, you know, and, you know, how are we able to imagine that, not only based in the prompt to imagine a landscape without prisons, but how can we collectively build them? Yeah.
And yeah, like another thing that's like a common theme, like in your t-shirts and plaques in the gardens, are like saying like grow gardens, not prisons. And I'm just curious as like, how do you connect like plants and abolition through your work?
Actually, you know, I think that, well, I know one of the first tenets of abolition is wonder. So if we have wonder or curiosity about alternative systems to address harm, you know, we are human beings. We will hurt each other. We are going to make mistakes. We will cause harm. But if we can understand, as Danielle Sered says, you know, that nobody enters violence for the first time by committing it, and we have a sense of curiosity of 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 the origins of violence, if we can chase those threads, I think then we can heal cycles of violence. And so the connection to the natural world, like I think that plants in the natural world are advocates of a of abolitionist landscape in many ways. You know, they inspire a sense of wonder and curiosity to begin with. But I also think, you know, in many examples, the natural world behaves in ways that are far more humane than we human beings, you know, in their collective ability to share and care for each other, in the ways that, you know, mycelium, for example, supports trees and plants and brings them nutrients, and then vice versa, the way the trees and plants can communicate to each other through networks of mycelium. You know, and I think there are very clear and individual examples of the ways that plants advocate for an abolitionist landscape, which, you know, we talk about on our website. We have an ongoing library. It's growingabolition.com/plants. And in that library, you can engage with these contemplative questions that are meant to be answered during the life cycle of the plants themselves, but they really explore the different ways that plants advocate and support an abolitionist lifestyle. And if it makes sense, Nicole Rose, I would be happy to maybe read a little bit about one of the plants and some of the ways that we're looking to the plants for solutions for the crises that we humans have created.
Yeah, I would love that so much. And I think people listening to the show are mostly plant geeks, so they would love it too. So yeah, take it away.
I'll let you pick. I'll just tell you, like, I've narrowed it down to thistle, ginger, plantain, fennel, or nettles. And we can do more than one, but maybe just starting with one that you feel called to hear
Ooh,
about.
maybe nettles would be good because it's early spring here and they're really coming out.
Yeah, we have to really encourage nettles to grow down here in Louisiana. But they are one of my favorite plants. So I'd be happy to read a little bit about them and the ways that nettles teach us to be abolitionists.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, nettles, Urtica dioica. Despite its sting, nettle has many helpful qualities. In the garden, it encourages beneficial insects and strengthens the growth of plants like mint and tomatoes. Nettle is a common perennial herb found voluntarily growing on moist forest edges and in meadows. The flowers of both male and female appear on single plants. Wild nettle, sometimes considered a weed, supports over 40 species of insects, including our beloved butterflies. Nettle can be an indicator of nutrient-rich soil, can be enjoyed as a tea, eaten in a salad. It's rich in vitamins, minerals, iron, And in all its forms, nettle is a good remedy for anemia, aiding in blood circulation. In fact, nettle, as we know it, was one of the things that the Irish ate during the Great Famine. Medicinally, it's been used to treat the kidneys, the urinary tract, gastrointestinal tract, the skin, the cardiovascular system, hemorrhages, and even the flu. Inflammation from nettles has long been a folk remedy for the treatment of rheumatism, and urtication or flogging with nettles is still used as a remedy for chronic arthritis. According to the herbalist Kelsey Barnett, nettle acts like an old grandmother, whipping you into shape. Coming from love and nourishment, she gives organs, muscles, skin, blood, and the limbs the medicine they truly need. She doesn't waste time. She gets right to the task at hand of cleaning house. The stinging hairs of nettle are composed of silica that inject a plant venom into the skin and cause a temporary rash. The irritation, however, can be eased with nettle juice, dock leaves, jewelweed, rosemary, mint, or sage, or any members of the sorrel family, which usually and conveniently grow nearby. So nettle represents the complexity of existence. These sharp, stinging plants are packed with competing forces, both healing, remedy, and stinging bite. The current justice system leaves no space for human complexity. Abolitionist pedagogy challenges us to create the space for rival truths and competing dualities. How do we build a system that allows for the whole person to be addressed in the face of transgression? To recognize that folks who have caused harm are also wonderful mothers, sisters, brothers, friends, allies, etc. Is it possible to create a system that responds to harm and permits us to nurture the potential of a person? How would this approach encourage collective healing? How does nettle remind us to do so?
Yeah, and nettles are one of the herbs in the Prisoner's Herbal Book as well. Definitely very abundant where I live. Thank you so much for sharing that. I know we don't have tons of time today, but I saw on your website that you're also growing flowers like on behalf of incarcerated mothers. And I just wondered if you could share a little bit more about this aspect of your work, like how it came about and which flowers you've chosen to grow and why.
Yeah, I love that project so much. So just, one thing that I am notoriously terrible at is really updating social media or websites or anything like that. So we have this kind of large scale project called Freedom to Grow. And underneath that is all of these different branches or roots, if you will, of solitary gardens, of Herman's House, of the solitary greenhouse. We have apothecarts and an apothaban, and all of these different ways that we are seeding an abolitionist future. And one of those projects is the Incarcerated Mama's Garden. And that began as a collaboration with some folks doing some organizing here in the United States or the colonized United States. 80% of all incarcerated women are mothers. And so, one of the obvious harms of this far reaching carceral institution, being the United States, the idea that we incarcerate more people than any place else in the world. When you are incarcerating women, 80% are mothers, you're fracturing families and causing harm for generations to come. And so the Incarcerated Mothers Garden has worked with women who are serving what we call LWOPs, life without the possibility of parole, or reframing of that is death by incarceration. So they are sentenced to die in a carceral institution. And at the time when we started this project, there were 42 women incarcerated at the women's institution here in Louisiana, St. Gabriel, who were serving death by incarceration sentences. And we invited them to grow plants with us in 3 different spaces. And those spaces were in New York, in Houston, Texas, and in New Orleans, Louisiana, those 3 gardens. And because of these different climates, we had to choose plants that would grow in all 3 of these very different climates. So that's how we narrowed it down to these 12 flowers. And then we sent descriptions and pictures of the flowers to every woman in St. Gabe that was serving a death by incarceration sentence, and invited them to choose one, maybe to share some of the reasons why they chose that flower. And then we planted those flowers on their behalf and in those 3 gardens. And the part I love so much about this project is that we also created corresponding seed packets. And folks who came to visit the gardens, or in the case of the one here in New Orleans, the garden was part of a gallery exhibition. And so when they visited the exhibition, they could take a seed packet, grow that flower, let's say it was echinacea, and then send us a picture of that flower growing wherever they lived. And then we would send a picture through Flickshop. We would send a postcard with that image on it to every mom who chose that flower, so they would see themselves planted around the country. So this idea that they were destined to be immobile for the rest of their unnatural lives serving these death by incarceration sentences was undermined by the possibility of seeing themselves grow around the country.
Wow, that's such a beautiful offering. I think for people who like haven't been in prison or haven't had like intimacy with people in prison, I think you can't comprehend like how much receiving a postcard like that could be like the reason you stay alive that day, if that makes sense, and not end your life. Because yeah, there's, prisons are so obviously traumatic and violent, and people are often like on the edge of suicide somehow. So like, I think, yeah, prisoner letter writing in general is so amazing because it keeps people going. But yeah, it's such a beautiful offering to also be able to share images of plants and herbs like that. So last but like really definitely not least, can you tell us a little bit more about the Abolitionists Apothecary?
Yeah, I'd really be happy to do that. I just also want to uplift what you just said, and that, very often a letter or a picture or just an acknowledgement that someone is alive who is being tortured by a carceral institution or a death camp in this case is a lifeline. And there's so many really amazing orgs like the Lifelines Project that are connecting folks. Black and Pink is another one here in the US, to pen pals around the world. And I would love to be able to share just a couple quotes from some of the moms about the flowers that they chose and why.
Yeah, I think I really needed to hear this today because I think sometimes I get quite fatigued with the prisoners' herbal stuff, like just the labor of like packing and posting books and like the constant like fundraising, drudgery, and like collective organizing stress. But yeah, like when you really think and talk to people, you just remember like how much that book or like any interaction like that can make a difference to someone. Um,
Yeah, I understand the fatigue and exhaustion completely. And, I just had a meeting last night with some other growers to really just, you can't make work that is about healing justice and exhaust yourself doing so, right? It's like it's counterintuitive and expressive to the ethos of what we're ultimately trying to do. And so all the ways that we remind each other of that I think is critical to sustaining this work.
yeah, for sure.
So this is a letter from Deirdre, who has recently come home, but while she was incarcerated, she chose snapdragons. And she wrote, "Dear Solitary Gardens, I was so emotional when I saw the kids planting flowers for us. Truly, this is a day to be grateful. The plant I desire to be planted even more is the snapdragon. I learned of this flower while incarcerated. The little flower looks as if it is talking, depending on how you move it around. Most importantly, the flower reminds me of children and how they just love to talk, talk, talk. With such beauty and pose, both sets of my heart are at ease. Please continue what you are doing and bridge more gaps with those inside. We are loving what you are doing and look forward to seeing them in the museum one day. Deirdre."
Oh, that's so
Um,
beautiful.
it's so beautiful. I'm looking for, let me see. There's one that um, really moved me. Okay. This one, we gave the moms the opportunity to be anonymous if they preferred. And so this one is an anonymous quote. Sorry it took me so long to get back to you. I just wanted to do my flower picking a little different. So I asked a special person in my life to pick what flower she thinks represents me. I feel that we as humans can be biased with ourselves, and understanding how important this garden is and the cause of mass incarceration is part of my healing. So my friend, he said, flower number 4, echinacea, represents me. And this is why she feels like it does. I will quote her verbatim. Quote, this flower represents you because of your guidance that you chose to represent in your life. The hedgehog is you with all these different cylinders, all these different spikes, genius and mastermind. That's what you are, and you take full advantage of any certain situation you may encounter. Though pretty and small, the center of you is overflowing with dominance and brilliance. End quote. I pray you don't mind that I chose to pick my flower this way, but it was special for me to do it. I value the opinion of my friend and just wanted to share this opportunity with someone else. Thank you.
Oh, amazing. I love that. Pretty and small, but full of dominance. I think that's just like the best, like, femme energy ever. So yeah, if you'd be able to just share a bit about the Abolitionist Apothecary before you leave, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I'd be happy. Sorry, like now I gotta, I'm just looking at all these beautiful quotes and I gotta just divert my attention. So the Abolitionist Apothecary was inspired by a solitary gardener that we grew with for 7 years. His name's Warren Chopper Palmer. We call him Chop. And he's since come home. But while he was incarcerated, solitary gardeners are encouraged to grow gardens for whatever reason. They like the color of a flower. In the case of Albert Woodfox, he wanted to feed the children that were visiting the gardens. It could be plants that remind folks of beloveds. It could be, an homage to someone who has joined the ancestors. But Chopper was very intentional about growing plant medicine. He actually learned about plants and plant medicine while he was incarcerated. And so, Chop's family was able to come visit and harvest from his garden many times, but we had this abundance of plant medicine that specifically came out of his gardens. And while inside, he was a voracious grower. Like he ended up growing, I think, 3 or 4 gardens rather than just one. And I have a big old smile here. And so, we started playing with some of the plant medicine that Chop had designed in his solitary garden, and then realizing just how powerful that was in practice and in metaphor, to really have plant medicine that was designed by someone who was accused of and had harmed someone, and to give that plant medicine back out for free to communities in which, the idea of victim, in which in the communities where folks have been harmed, I think really transcends our perceptions of criminality, and the possibility that folks who are incarcerated can actually heal those communities literally and figuratively, and are ultimately responsible for it, and there's this beautiful poetic in Chop designing one of his gardens with Passiflora incarnata, or what we call maypop or passion flower out here, which is a plant that is a really powerful in helping us move through withdrawals and addiction. And Chopper said, if I had access to this knowledge and this plant medicine when I was 16 years old, when I got caught up in the harm that I caused, I might not have caused it. And so, the Abolitionist Apothecary is born out of that. And we have this big old plant powered apothecary here in New Orleans, where the plant medicine is made from solitary gardens and the Abolitionist Sanctuary and all of these sister gardens that we're growing. And then we offer it back out to communities who are systems impacted, to not only, the family members of folks who are incarcerated or folks who have been harmed by others, but to folks who are doing this work for the long haul. So that could be attorneys or advocates or folks who just come in off the street and are like, yo, I can't sleep, And so, yeah, the Abolitionist Apothecary, again, is also part of that website, growingabolition.com. And there's a bunch of photos online. We document it through Solitary Gardens on Instagram. And it's housed here at the John Thompson Legacy Center. So if I could also shout them out, the JTLC has its own Instagram, which is JTLC NOLA, NOLA. And so we're working in concert in conjunction and coalition with many other folks, mostly folks, that have spent time inside a prison, jail, or a detention center. So yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful, intense work. And I'm just so grateful to be in community with yourself and others who see the values, the multitude of values that plants give us and gift us and hold us with.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Before we finish, is there anything else you'd like to share? And also, where can people find you or follow you or keep up to date with all your awesome work? Do you need donations or is there any ways people can kind of support all this amazing stuff that you're doing?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I think, I'm notoriously bad at keeping up with social media and updating the websites. But if there is anything urgent or if there's a call to action or a way to support us, I usually post on our Instagram, which is just Solitary Gardens, one word. And it's not explicit to the work that we're doing. We are, as I said, in coalition with many others who are facing, what is a super conservative majority here in the state of Louisiana, who's rolled back any recent successes. We've had to decriminalize and decarcerate. And so, now is the time for folks to stay awake and engaged. We do have a website. We have solitarygardens.org and growingabolition.com. And both of those websites, if you are curious about the work that we're doing, you can deep dive into it. And it's just with gratitude that I look forward to growing and building with you even more.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been really moving, and I encourage anyone listening to really just go and look at the photos and read everything on your site and look at the field guide and just, feel very inspired and strengthened. And if anyone is listening from kind of the UK, and would be interested in starting something similar here, I would love to connect with you maybe after the babies come. But thanks so much again for your time. And I hope you have a good rest of your day, your busy day.
Yeah. And thanks so much for making time for me and this work, and big, big blessings for that. Is it going to be a Taurus, this little baby?
Yeah, unless he comes early, and then he might be an Aries. So we'll see.
No, let's go Taurus. Let's go Taurus.
What star sign are you? Are you a Taurus?
It's a nightmare over here. It's Gemini, Sun, Leo rising, Scorpio moon.
Oh, nice. I had a feeling there was some Gemini in there.
There's lots of Gemini in this
from
chart.
the multiples of projects. That's so.
Yeah.
I've got a Gemini ascendant, so kind of in that zone a lot as well. Thanks so much for listening to the Frontline Herbalism Podcast. You can find the transcript, the links, all the resources from the show at solidarityapothecary.org/podcast.